Thank you for viewing this program presented by the Yavapai Group of the Grand Canyon chapter of the Sierra Club. I'm Gary Beverly, chair of the Yavapai Group. If you would like to receive our monthly newsletter, you can email me at yavapaisierra@gmail.com. The Grand Canyon chapter has more than 60,000 members and supporters in Arizona. Our mission is to explore, enjoy, and protect the wild places of the earth, to practice and promote the responsible use of the Earth's ecosystems and resources, and to educate and enlist humanity to protect and restore the quality of the natural and human environments. The Sierra Club is especially committed to protecting the Upper Verde River and other water resources around the state. Water resources are managed by the laws of the state of Arizona, along with voting rights, state parks, wildlife, clean air and water, climate change, and environmental justice. Thus, the Sierra Club is deeply involved in the state legislative process, and that is the reason for tonight's program. Tonight's program topic is water, climate, and democracy. It's presented by Sandy Barr, director of the Grand Canyon chapter. Each year, Sandy devotes several months to advocacy at the Arizona Legislature, trying to stop bad bills and supporting good ones. She's a skilled and respected voice at the legislature. Sandy will review the 2022 legislative session and predict what's headed our way for the 2023 session, both with a specific focus on water. And she will invite you to join us at Environment Day at the Capitol on February 7th. Now, responding to questions is an important part of this presentation. Viewers can submit questions at any time using the chat button at the bottom bar of your screen. After the presentation, we will first respond to the written questions and then open up to verbal questions. So with that, let's get started with today's presentation. Welcome, Sandy Barr.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you everyone for being here this evening. I am going to go ahead and share my screen and do the slideshow from the beginning. Yay. Yeah, I always enjoy doing this program. We used to always do it in person, but I like doing it virtually as well because a lot more people can participate, and so that's nice. So as Gary said, I'm Sandy Barr, and I'm coming up on my 25th anniversary with Sierra Club. I can't believe it, but you know, time flies when you're having fun, and I have to say, as challenging as the work is, I very much enjoy it, and a big part of that is working with you all. So let's go ahead and jump in. Here are some of the issues I'm going to cover this evening. I am going to talk a little bit about what happened in 2022 and just go over quickly a few of the bills that were considered, briefly talk about our report card on the legislature, which we issue every year, and then jump into 2023 and talk a little bit about what the governor has done, what has been introduced so far, environmental priorities, and then of course, Environmental Day. And I hope to leave plenty of time for questions, but I'm actually happy to stay on as long as you have questions. So what did the Arizona legislature do on water in 2022? Well, not much. They, or not much good, I should say. They passed no bills to limit groundwater pumping. They passed no bills to require conservation. They passed no bills to protect rivers. They did allocate a lot of money, however. And where they allocated a lot of money was in Senate Bill 1740. This is probably a bill many of you have heard about. It created the expanded Water Infrastructure Finance Authority that has significant authority to contract for water augmentation. They allocated $1 billion over 3 years for that augmentation, expanded water supply development, loans, grants, bonds. And they did allocate $200 million for conservation measures, but those are voluntary conservation measures. They cannot fund any mandatory conservation measures. And they totally left out the tribes. So this year, there will likely be a bill to go back and include the tribal nations, but they totally left them out. And they had some other unhelpful legislation, the way I see it, seeking to further privatize water, giving private water companies the ability to import water from outside. This relates to the Phoenix Active Management Area, but specifically in the Harquahala Valley, and bring it into the active management area. This bill is for a particular company, Upcore, and something that we opposed. It did not get through, but I expect it will be back again. And what did they do on climate? Well, not anything to speak of. Most of the bills weren't heard that related directly to climate. They did look at some issues on electric vehicles, but almost none of these bills passed. Only the last one, Senate Bill 1246, which expedites procurement of electric vehicle buses, electric buses. So it was one small thing, but not too much. And then there were more than 100 bills that attacked democracy, numerous anti-voting bills, bills to attack ballot measures. And they, of course, referred some to the ballot to make ballot measures more difficult. And this is just a few of those bills. I know it's a lot of words, so I'm not going to talk about them individually. I just wanted you to visually see that there were a lot of bills attacking the voting process. One thing I want to mention right now too is the court just ruled, the Court of Appeals just ruled in favor of keeping vote by mail, despite some efforts to get rid of it. So that's good news. And then there were the attacks on direct democracy. One of the measures that they referred this last session to require a 60% vote on any ballot measures that include taxing funding proposals, that they now require a 60% approval rating. And there was also a referral on single subject that will make ballot measures more difficult. And then what did our former governor do? And I focused on water here mostly, but a few other things. You know, he pushed through that water augmentation legislation, and actually at the end of last year helped push through exploring this idea of the desalination plant down on the Gulf of California. And a lot of that was done through backroom deals. They signed non-disclosure agreements, and boom, all of a sudden at the end of last year, this popped up with really no notice to speak of, the minimum notice required by the open meeting law. He also suppressed a water report that showed that there wasn't adequate water in the West Valley area of Phoenix, out on the other side of the white tanks. This report, you know, basically, said there wasn't enough water for the development that had been platted. So not a very good record on water. And then, of course, totally ignored the climate crisis, wouldn't even say the words for a while, and also signed some anti-voter bills. So So if you want to look at more details on the bills that I just touched upon, you can find more details in our 2022 environmental report card. There's a pretty comprehensive write-up on Senate Bill 1740 that includes the good, the bad, and the ugly of that bill. And there are, like I said, there are a couple of good provisions, but overall the augmentation provisions were really harmful. And we also graded on a number of the democracy bills as well. We did not grade on the bills that were never heard. We can't grade on things that they didn't hear and didn't vote on. But if we did, they would surely get a failing grade for that. And here is a snapshot of the grades. A number of these legislators are not there. There's a huge turnover for 2023, and that does provide opportunity. Also some challenges with, as we've seen in the Natural Resources, Energy and Water Committees so far. Some interesting questions that have been asked about water and about energy, and yeah, it will be a very interesting session. But you can see there are far too many Fs, and you know, we every year try to encourage legislators to do better, to at least get passing grades, but we'd like to see a lot more A's and A+. All right, so let's shift gears now to 2023 at the Capitol. So we have a new governor. Governor Hobbs was sworn in earlier this month and delivered the State of the State address on January 9th. Just FYI, the State of the State is always the first day of the legislative session, and the first day of the legislative session is always the second Monday in January. In her State of the State address, she spoke rather extensively about water. She really didn't touch on other environmental issues, but she spoke quite a lot about water, and actually gave some details. Her State of the State address included more details than they usually do. They're not generally speeches where detailed policy is outlined, and so it was yeah, it was refreshing to hear a few more in this speech. She's establishing a resiliency office. She heard from a lot of people who wanted her to reestablish the energy office because Arizona doesn't have one. And in looking at, you know, what the needs relative to water and land, she established this office, and looking forward to seeing more about what the office does, but I think it could be a very positive thing for Arizona. She issued an executive order on groundwater. She's calling for reviewing the Groundwater Management Act, which was passed in 1980 and has only been weakened since then, and of course left out some pretty important details, even when it was passed. For example, it doesn't recognize that pumping groundwater destroys rivers, dries up springs. And so that's something that, you know, ought to be looked at as far as the revising that Groundwater Management Act. And so they'll be taking a look at that. I think, you know, looking to establish limits on groundwater pumping outside of the active management areas as well, because we know it's a real free-for-all out there relative to groundwater pumping. She released that suppressed water report that I talked about earlier, that former Governor Ducey had kept under wraps. And she actually mentioned that in her State of the State address. And she's included some funding for water in her state budget. So what is the Arizona legislature doing so far? They've only been there for a couple weeks, well, 1 full week, I guess, and a week and a half. So they've introduced a lot of bills in the House because the House has a deadline in the first day to, if whatever isn't, after that day, they can only introduce 7 additional bills each. And so there you see a flurry of bills introduced. And so they did that. And so most of the bills that we know about right now are House bills, but the Senate bills are starting to come. They have introduced bills to limit groundwater pumping and protect rivers. One thing I want to mention, however, about those bills is they will have a tough time getting hearings because Gail Griffin and Seneca chair the House and Senate Natural Resources Committees, and they are gatekeepers. They have kept these same bills that were introduced last year and the year before. Have been kept from coming to the floor, and some of them have been introduced, for 8 or 10 years. Gail Griffin has either chaired the House or Senate committee where those bills would be heard and has not let them come through. So she's very much part of the problem when it comes to addressing water issues at the Arizona legislature. And she has introduced some fairly weak bills and harmful water bills. They're the weak ones, I guess I would say, are more distractions. And I'll talk about a couple of those. And then, of course, we really don't need any bills to take us backwards on protecting our waters. And then a bunch more anti-democracy bills have been introduced as well. I'm not going to talk too much about those tonight. We're still evaluating those, but I'm happy to answer follow-up questions on those, and we will be doing a program specifically on those in the coming weeks. So. And I know this is very wordy, but I just wanted to list out some of the positive water bills that have been introduced. A lot of these are the bills I talked about, that they get introduced year after year and they don't get a hearing. Measures to make it easier for the director of the Department of Water Resources to declare an irrigation non-expansion area. And what that does is it says you can't add more irrigated acres within that area. This bill would allow the director to look at future impacts, not just what is happening today. I did want to mention one of the bills introduced by one of the new Republicans that looks pretty good to me. Is 2048. It was introduced by Representative Bliss, and it says basically if you're platting 6 or more residences that you have to have an assured water supply. I think more needs to be done on that to limit what happens in places like Rio Verde, where they've had lot splits and people there thought they had water, and their contract with Scottsdale has been eliminated, and so now they don't have water. And that's what happens with when you don't have good regulations in place, good consumer protections in place. So but anyway, I thought her bill was a plus. I was looking through that yesterday. And there are a number of bills relating to requiring adequate water supply for development statewide. Right now, you don't have to have an adequate water supply outside the active management areas. And you don't have to tell second-time home buyers that there isn't an adequate water supply, only the first-time buyers. So there's not much consumer protection there either. I think something will be introduced later to provide it. There are a couple of new twists. The teachers having like a module for teachers to teach conservation and drought. I thought that was an interesting bill and a good idea. I think having teachers and their students learn more about that will only help our state. And then Representative Griffin has a bill that gives counties more authority to engage in water reuse and recycling. So I thought that that bill was headed in the right direction, but we'll see if she does anything to amend it to make it less helpful. And then this is a bill that will be introduced and has been introduced for the last 3 years. It is a watershed health ecological water bill that allows those with water rights to sever and transfer those rights and allocate them for the rivers. So basically watershed health and watershed health uses are considered a beneficial use of the water. And it does require an assessment of surface waters by the director or by the Arizona Department of Water Resources. This will be introduced by Representative Stahl Hamilton and Senator Sundarshan. So we're working, there may be just one tiny tweak on it, but it will be very similar to last year. And again, the big challenge with this bill and the bills I just talked about, with the exception of Representative Griffin's bill, is that is getting a hearing. Here are a few harmful bills so far, or I guess a distraction. I don't know, the temporary non-expansion area. I don't know if it's harmful, but it's not good, because having a temporary irrigation non-expansion area or any temporary limits on groundwater pumping, I think, are not going to get us where we need to be. And that bill was heard last year and luckily did not make it out of the House. 2411 is a bill that basically says that if a city has provided water but then limits the water supply to an area that's outside its service area, then it's liable for damages. This is directed at Scottsdale and the Rio Verde mess. It is definitely not the way to address the problem. It just really rewards, in a lot of ways, this type of wildcat development and not ensuring that there's adequate water with development. And then the first bill is an attempt to exempt dry washes that are on private property from the Clean Water Act, which I think there are some issues with the state actually exempting them from the Clean Water Act. This is a really bad idea because it, again, sends a message that these desert washes, these washes that don't always have water in them, aren't important. And we know they're hugely important. They're important for our perennial rivers. They're important for groundwater recharge. They're important for wildlife, and having protections stop at the property line is unwise, to say the least. There also will be a couple of bills related to climate change coming up. One to repeal a prohibition on agencies doing anything to limit greenhouse gas emissions. That's something that was passed by the legislature and signed by then Governor Brewer. It was a response to a climate plan that then Governor Napolitano had helped advance, and so they decided to just shut down the agencies. So unless the legislature gives explicit authority in a particular area for an agency to act on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, they can't do it. So it's very harmful. So that would repeal that provision. And then there will be a bill to establish a climate resiliency plan as well. Again, that bill doesn't get a hearing or doesn't advance, perhaps that could be addressed through the governor's resiliency office. And of course, Arizona needs a statewide climate plan. There are more anti-democracy bills that have been introduced this session. Last session, like I said, there were over 100. I think they may be on track to do that again. They're looking to put more limits on ballot measures, this time to require 60% approval for constitutional amendments, more limits on early voting, and more ID requirements. Make no mistake, these bills are not intended to fix anything. They are intended to undermine our election process and suppress votes. Whoops, went too far. I just wanted to mention that earlier this year, back on January 3rd, we released 2023 environmental priorities for the Arizona legislature and governor. And by we, I mean there were 42 groups that were part of that release at the time. We now have 47 groups signed on. And this document outlines priorities in areas such as climate, water, environmental justice, land, habitat, and wildlife, and democracy. And it's a pretty comprehensive document and a good guide for, I think, if a legislator or if someone is new to the state, they want to see what's going on here, and then some recommendations on what can be done. It's definitely aspirational, but we think it's important to be aspirational with both the legislature and the governor, and really push hard on things like water and climate, environmental justice. We haven't had any legislation pass on environmental justice, despite the fact it's been introduced. Well, like I said, I've been working for Sierra Club for now almost 25 years, and pretty much every session there are environmental justice bills. So just kind of shifting away from the legislature and more to you all, wanted to share some things that you can do relative to water. I know some of you are already doing this, but you can learn more about it. And I know you're starting to do that here, but I wanted to mention we will be having a separate program on that, and I will give you more details on that in a minute. Support that watershed health, ecological water bill, and other positive legislation. Just ask legislators about water, ask them what they're doing and why they're doing it. Advocate for good water policies, and share information with your neighbors, your friends, candidates. You can do some of that via letters to the editor, blogs, social media, or just conversations. And if you're talking to your neighbor or your friends, it's going to have a lot more impact than if they hear me, someone they don't know, talk about it. So don't underestimate the kind of impact that you can have in your community. And then you can participate in some briefings and workshops that we have coming up. These are geared toward preparing people for our lobby day, Environmental Day at the Capitol. We have one coming up on Monday on climate and clean energy. I know those, the URLs for registering are very long. I did not have a chance to create shorter ones. And so we can just send them to you. And I'm happy to also share this slideshow. We have a volunteer lobby workshop coming up on the 26th. The Water 101 program will be on the 27th, and I know Gary is going to be part of that, and then environmental justice on January 31st. We're still finalizing the date on the democracy program, and we will also, right before Environmental Day, we'll do, usually on a Friday evening, a session where we go over the bills that that folks will be lobbying on that day, and it's a good just refresher on some of the bills. So that will also be scheduled soon. And then Environmental Day at the Capitol, as Gary said earlier, that's February 7th. It's a Tuesday this year. We had to move it because there are a lot of conflicts at the Capitol this year. In the morning, people will be meeting with legislators as they can schedule it. If you don't have any meetings scheduled, then come on down at about 11:30 to get registered. And then our program will start at noon. We'll have tabling, information tables, opportunities for action. We'll be doing a news conference, and there'll be opportunity to meet with legislators, and I think it'll be a really good program, and we'll wrap up about 4. It is in Wesley Bolin Plaza, which is just to the east of the Capitol complex. Normally we're over right around the House and Senate in an area called the Rose Garden, but they're doing lawn work this year and also erecting walls around the House parking lot. So that space is not available this year. And so we'll again be over in Wesley Bolin Plaza. And if you've been there at all, that's the area where all the monuments are. So another thing that you can do is you can sign up for our legislative alerts. There's a short sign up link. You can also find this on our website, or I can send it to you, and take action via email. Send messages to your legislators that you support or oppose measures. You can sign up for the request to speak system. Our volunteer lobby workshop will go a little bit more into this, and you can also sign up for a session with civic engagement beyond voting. They have specific trainings on using that system. It allows you to register your support or opposition for a bill. And if you want to speak, also speak, but you don't have to, even though it's called requests to speak. And then, watch or speak at committee hearings. I think it's very impactful if people who are not actually, working for organizations, people who come down or over or up on their own time and address the legislature. I think it's very impactful. So if you do have time to do that, I encourage you to do that. And I think that's it. And I'd be happy to take your questions. Oh, one more thing on the Environmental Day. We're also setting up meetings with legislators. There are team leaders, so you'll have an opportunity to meet with legislators as part of a team. All right, happy to answer questions. And should I stop sharing? I'll stop sharing so I can see everybody.
Thank you, Sandy. Yes, stop sharing and then we can see people. Go back to the gallery view so I can see everyone. So let's get started just going through the meeting chat. So Jenna Stormont says that Tucson Water is currently developing a plan to manage the city's water resources. The goal of the One Water Master Plan is to foster a shared vision for providing a reliable resource, high quality water for our community in decades to come. As part of the planning process, the city has a survey. The survey link is in the chat, and it's always useful for you to do this. Water resource planning is really, really important. And a good plan always involves stakeholders in the public. So this is a great opportunity for you to participate in that plan.
And having that kind of transparency is really important, something that we don't have at the Arizona Legislature.
Right, so we don't have very many questions in the chat. There's a little chatting going on, which is okay. So Julia asked, the pumping of water on state lands by the Saudis got a lot of press, but isn't it true that State Lands Department never charges farmers for water? If so, is there any possibility of seeing a bill that would change that?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And you're right, the Saudis got a lot of attention, but a lot of other entities do the same thing. It's just that we have, particular animosity towards Saudi Arabia. So it makes, for, it causes a big splash. And it is outrageous, the fact that it is, even cost effective to do what they're doing tells you how we have undervalued our water and our state trust lands. So, but I think there's a possibility, and there might also be legal actions. I know this is something that Attorney General Mays is looking at. She brought that up during her campaign, but also was just talking about it the other day. And it's also something I think that the state land commissioner should look at, and hopefully we'll get a new one. But the land commissioner is supposed to do what's in the best interest of the trust, and that means maximizing dollars from state trust lands. Water would be part of that. So why isn't that included? Why isn't that part of these leases? Well, as far as legislation, I don't know because of the gatekeepers, but I think it's a good idea. And then I also think there are some other avenues to look at.
Okay, Steve wants to know what's the current makeup of Republicans and Dems in the House and Senate? What are the numbers?
They're exactly the same as they were last session, and that is 31 Republicans and 29 Democrats in the House. And there are 16 Republicans and 14 Democrats in the Senate. And a lot of people, when they see those close numbers, they think, wow, this should mean that they come together and work on things. And that was not the case the last couple of sessions. The the majority, whoever's the majority, has a lot of, I mean, they basically control the chamber. They decide who's speaker, who's Senate president, who chairs the committees, what bills get assigned, where they get assigned, and then the chairs decide whether or not they're heard. So they have a lot of power. One thing that may change that a little bit this year, we haven't seen evidence of it yet, but there's still time, is that the governor is of a different party than the majority. And so if legislators want her to sign their bills, they should be willing to sit down and at least negotiate on some of them. So we'll see what happens with that, but it does change things up quite a lot.
So Steve also wants to know what's behind Governor Hobbs keeping Tom Bushatsky in charge of the Bureau of Water, in charge of the Department of Water Resources. Do you wish he had found a replacement?
Yes, Sierra Club does wish that she would have appointed someone else. I think my quote was, "You should only stay the course if you're going the right direction," and we haven't been doing that relative to our water resources, and would have liked to have seen her appoint someone who, one, I think is more respectful of the public and wanting to include more people versus doing these deals, and really bringing some transparency into the process as well as accountability. Also someone who really understands or embraces the fact that climate change is a huge issue for us relative to our water. He did change what he said a bit when he spoke in committee last week. He did respond to a question on climate change and said, as I've always said, it's a factor, but he did not respond on human caused climate change. So that was interesting. I think the governor decided to do that because of all the things going on right now. And there are a number of entities in the state who wanted to see stability relative to water. And I think that's why she did it. But perhaps she'll look for someone who's a little more conservation minded, in a year or so. We'll see.
Okay, so there's some good questions coming in. Yeah, and that's good. Keep sending them in. Otherwise, I'm going to start asking my questions. So that's a threat. Keep sending questions in the chat. Here's another one. Can Governor Hobbs move on a statewide climate action plan without legislative approval as an executive order, in other words? Do you think she will do that in 2023?
I think she can, especially on climate resiliency. I think there are some barriers for a plan where it would direct the agencies to, directly to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But there are things that she could include that that would indirectly do that. And definitely on resiliency, there's no reason why she can't do a statewide plan that includes Department of Water Resources, Department of Environmental Quality, Land Department, the various agencies, as well as important, having stakeholders and public processes to really plan for resiliency and the impacts of climate change that we're already seeing and that we will see. So I don't know if she will do it, but I'm cautiously optimistic that the fact that she's established this resiliency office will, yeah, it's, will mean that she's more willing to do that.
Mhm. Okay, Mark says that Cinema has been strutting around the state and region with what seems to be a new water management organization. Where does this group fit into the regional water hierarchy?
I don't know, really. I mean, I think it's her group. It doesn't really have any state. There's no there's no foundation in state law, right? Or really even federal law. So it's more of a, a PR tour, I guess. That's all I can say about it right now. I don't know that it has any real sway, except a lot of the people on it are, the same folks that have been involved in water policy issues in Arizona for a long time.
Didn't that Cinema's group include billions of dollars from the Inflation Reduction Act for water mitigations in the lower basin or something?
Yeah, there are dollars in it, but does this group actually have that authority? Was that part of the bill? If
Don't
it
know.
was, I may be mistaken. I'll double check that because I may be mistaken on that. Maybe they do have more sway than I thought.
Okay, let's see. There's a recent court decision on Marana's sewer treatment facility that they can't impose the costs on all new development. Have you seen that, and does it have implications for the desal proposal? It concerns me that much of the cost of a desal option may be imposed on existing development. And why is brackish water treatment excluded from consideration in Senate Bill 1740?
Oh,
There's a lot there. I can go back over one by one.
right. Let's see. Let's start with the Marana decision. I haven't read it, but I read about it. And so I don't know. I don't know exactly what the implications are relative to the desal proposal, but clearly, I mean, that proposal is just, is problematic in so many ways. But one of the ways that it's very much a problem is that we're talking about water that would be $3,000 per acre foot. So that would be a huge burden. And we know, ag won't pay it. And yeah, it's hugely expensive. So if they try to, have existing development foot the bill for it, that will, it will disproportionately harm poor people, just like a lot of the policies. So I'm hoping that we can put a stop to that proposal altogether. But this idea that developers don't have to bear more of the costs for the impacts of their developments. They make a lot of money, and then they pocket the profits, and then the costs are left for the rest of us to pick up. And that really is a problem. But I have not read that yet. I will.
So we've up in Prescott, we've been looking at that WIFA thing a lot, and the $3,000 an acre foot is actually affordable for new developments. If a developer gets down to being able to build and pay $3,000 an acre foot, it adds about $600 a year to the water bill for that house. That's, to a developer, that's very affordable because they're not paying it.
Yeah.
So, but the other thing that really sticks in our throat up here is that the there's over $1 billion in tax money that's collected from citizens all over the state, including Northern Arizona. And the current desal proposal dumps that water into the CAP canal at Lake Pleasant. So, we're paying, we're not getting any benefit for it. Baloney. We're really not happy with this whole WIFA thing, and I could go on, but I won't. Instead, I'll read another question.
Yeah, it's the bill was a problem last year, which is why we opposed it.
So I read that Ellie is writing this question, and I read that ADWR indicated due to the inadequate water in the Hassayampa Basin that developers have to get their water from someone other than the groundwater basin. Does ADWR have the authority to do this? Will it be challenged? How close are other basins to not meeting 100-year water availability?
Well, we'll have to see what other reports come out, but yes, ADWR does have that authority. It's they can study it and they've done that previously. It happened in Pinal County as well. They determined that there wasn't adequate water available there as well. And I think, if the agency, maybe with some political support from the governor, will be more active in releasing this type of information. But there's still the whole issue that outside of the active management areas, it's kind of a free-for-all still. So there's a huge part of the state that where there's not adequate information, although we know that if there's a lot of groundwater pumping, that it is affecting flowing rivers, that it's affecting neighboring wells, those types of things. And I think I mentioned earlier that the director had established a new irrigation non-expansion area. That's something else that he can do. He did that up in Kingman to limit new acreage. It doesn't really help you with the what's already being pumped, but it helps you with limiting new acres for irrigation.
So Ellie also asked, will it be challenged? Probably yes.
Yeah.
How close are other water basins to not meeting 100-year? I just want to add in that none of the AMAs in the state will meet their goal of safe yield by 2025. And the Prescott AMA is the worst in the state.
Right. And the closest is Tucson. And they're doing better. They stored a lot of water, a lot of CAP water, but as the CAP water dries up, literally, they will move back into or farther away from safe yield as well. There's a really good report that the Morrison Institute did that basically shows the status of the active management areas and projects out where they'll be. It has a lot of other good information in it as well. And of course, I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but I'd be happy to send along the link to it if folks don't have it.
I think it's called The Myth of Safe Yield, something like that, by Kathy Ferris and Porter.
Sarah Porter, yeah.
Sarah Porter, yeah. So Jeannie has a question. Do you have any idea what Karen Peters' priorities will be with respect to water issues, as she is the new ADEQ director? And to that, I say, this is great.
Well, the former director is finished. Director Cabrera's last day was Friday, so we're happy to see him leave the building, and has been a real problem for that agency. Karen Peters has worked for the city of Phoenix for a very long time. She is the deputy city manager. She prior to doing that, she represented the city. I met her when she was representing the city at the legislature, particularly on water quality assurance revolving fund issues. I'm optimistic that she will be someone who understands that that they, they're not, their customers are not the developers and the mines, but that the public, they serve the public. And I'm hopeful that she will be a good manager as far as people go, because they need to be able to attract and hold on to good people at the Department of Environmental Quality. They've had a lot of turnover, especially on water quality issues, and I'm sure some people saw the very scathing audit that ADEQ got in the fall of 2021, showing that they had not been implementing a lot of the programs that they're tasked with implementing, including addressing impaired waters that don't meet water quality standards. So I don't know. I'm planning to talk to her soon, and I will have more later, but I'm optimistic that it will be a turn in the right direction.
While we're talking about appointments, are there other Hobbs appointments that you're hopeful for?
Well, there's the Residential Utility Consumers Office, which is that's an entity that people may have seen if you've done work at the Arizona Corporation Commission. That person is supposed to be advocating for consumers, residential consumers. It's the name of the office. They have not been doing that for a very long time. Cynthia Zwick, who was with an entity called Wildfire, they implemented a lot of programs for low-income residents. She was appointed to that, so I think she'll do a really good job there. She is, she knows what consumer protection is, and I think she'll be a good advocate there. They haven't made the appointment to the State Land Department yet, so we're very interested in that one. We already talked about DWR. I don't need to continue about the concerns there. What other ones do I want to mention? Oh, well, she kept Bob Broscheid on at State Parks. And I think in that case, that's a good decision. He came in when State Parks was just a total disaster after Sue Black had basically caused everyone to quit because of some very abusive workplace practices. And so it was kind of a mess, and I think he's done a pretty good job at State Parks. And folks like the Heritage Alliance and the Arizona Trail Association were supporting keeping him on, and they work more closely with him day to day. So I think that was a good choice there. And the governor, she mentioned Ty Gray at Game and Fish, but the governor really doesn't appoint the Game and Fish Department director. It's the Game and Fish Commission that does that. So, he will be staying on until the commission decides he's not.
Okay. Julia asks, how about an energy bill that would require consideration of energy intensity per unit of water produced? Would that go in a different committee than Griffin's? She's trying to find a way to go around the block.
I like how you're thinking, yes. And my guess is because it would mention both energy and water, that it would go to her committee, but it is really up to the speaker. It's one of the ways they have so much power, like they could decide to assign a bill to a different committee, but they generally don't, because they don't want to get crosswise with Representative Griffin. But yeah, I mean, that's certainly the kind of thing that that can and should, be looked at. And the whole connection between water use and energy, I think is, something that legislators need to be informed more about. There was a meeting yesterday and they were asking the utilities why they didn't just do all nuclear. And, of course, nuclear power uses a lot of water. And these small modular nuclear reactors that they were talking about, they're not operational. They're not ready for prime time. And of course, there are all kinds of other issues as far as waste and uranium mining and such. But I thought that was really kind of interesting, that they just weren't really thinking about that at all. Coal plants, they want to keep coal plants going longer. Coal plants use a lot of water as well. And so, yeah, I think we have some education work to do, and hopefully a few of the ones that were asking those questions will be open to learning more.
Okay, on this kind of on the same topic, Joanne asked, do you have any opinion on the most effective way to get bills heard in the Natural Resources Committee?
Well, first of all, I think it helps if you get one of the chairs to sponsor your bill. That is probably the number one way to get your bill heard. And second to that is to have someone in the majority sponsor it, which on our watershed health bill, we tried to do before Regina Cobb left the legislature. We asked her if she would sponsor it, and she did sign on as a co-sponsor, but she didn't want to be the prime, because she couldn't even get her own bill heard, and she was chair of the Appropriations Committee. So I think, I think if it's a bill that doesn't cause, especially Representative Griffin, to feel threatened in some way, maybe something, more limited, I think maybe there's a shot there. The study committees, sometimes she will hear, but it's tough. It's tough. I'm sorry, I can't be more, like, oh, if we just all called her, or got everyone in her district to call her, but she's a very hard person to get to move on some of this.
Well, the obvious answer is let's just flip the legislature. I mean, that would work. Joanne continues asking about Attorney General Chris Mays, who in her campaign had a 16-point plan on water preservation. Is that going to help us at all?
Absolutely. I think having someone in the Attorney General's office who is looking to protect Arizona's resources and looking to protect our water and really think about sustainability. Chris Mays has, the advantage that she was a corporation commissioner, so she knows that end of things really well. Obviously knows the law really well, and has looked at seriously at the water energy connections. So I think it will be super helpful. She can she can intervene in lawsuits. She can say no to bad. She doesn't have to right now. She doesn't have to represent the legislature on, some of these wacky ideas that they push forward. They are trying to force her to. There's a bill that would force the attorney general to represent them. I don't think that's something that the governor would sign, but that is something that they're trying. The other thing that'll help is just, not like Brnovich kept, either filing or signing us on to all of these lawsuits challenging federal environmental protections. And so it will help to have someone there that is not doing that as well.
So there's another question here that gets into some legal weeds on the beneficial use doctrine. And so instead of that, let me ask you about the governor's water policy review committee. That's not the exact name. And the people on that seem to be the same old water players and invested interests that have always participated in state water discussions, which suggests to me I'm not too optimistic about this. Do you have thoughts on this?
Well, I can't believe it, Gary, but I'm more optimistic than you. There are some changes on there. There are some additions on there. I think one of the reasons it looks very similar is the director of the Department of Water Resources chairs it. So Bushatsky is still there. And so, there are slots for some environmental groups that, focus on water. There are more slots for tribal nations, for, three tribes that they don't name specifically, and then the Navajo Nation. And the Navajo Nation has not been included in most of the water discussions, even though they're the largest, tribal nation in our state, and so they haven't been included because they don't have water to sell and deal with in these negotiations. The Gila River Indian community does and has been part of it, and then the Colorado River Indian tribes, but most of the other tribes have been totally left out. And so I think that is a positive. And then, we'll have to see. I mean, you're right. There are a lot of the usual suspects that are part of it. But one thing, if they do things in the light of day where people can provide input and they seriously consider comments, I think that itself can help steer it in a different direction. There's nothing like sunshine on these processes, and on water, it's been a lot of backdoor deals. Ducey loves backdoor deals, so.
Okay, so the chat questions are calming down. I have one last question about bills that could be introduced. Is there any movement towards a rural management authority bill? And you could explain what that is.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that in the bills I was talking about. There are some people working on a rural management authority bill, and this basically would be a measure to allow for, or in our case, require limits on, on groundwater pumping, and give authority to the Department of Water Resources or counties to do that, and possibly both. And what we were trying to get the bill last year strengthened to, because the way it was written, it was all voluntary. There was nothing mandatory. And we're way past where we can get there with just voluntary measures. It's one of the problems with the conservation provisions in 1742. It can only fund voluntary measures. We have to have some mandatory conservation. So there is discussion about that. A bill has not been introduced yet. And but my understanding is that Representative Biasucci Mojave County legislator will be introducing it, and yeah, we'll see. I know Cobb last year spent a lot of time trying to get the Farm Bureau and some of the livestock interests on board with it, and they never did support it. And she couldn't get a hearing on her bill, even though it was, as I said, not nearly strong enough, and even though they made a lot of concessions. So I'm hopeful that we'll see something stronger this time around, but it will still have the hurdle of getting past Gail Griffin in the House.
Okay, and here's the last question. What is the current status of the state standards for Arizona streams? This is a confusing thing because the feds are coming out with a new rule and the state was doing something, and I don't know, where are we at?
Is the question related to waters of the US? Is that what they mean, or do they
I think so. Yeah.
The new rule on waters of the US came out today. I think I saw, I got pinged on that, so should take a look at it. But there is a Supreme Court case that we're expecting a decision on anytime, that the Sackett case that could narrow the application of the Clean Water Act significantly, where that's what the Sacketts and the people who are helping to support them would like to see, is a narrowing of it, and basically no ephemeral waters, the desert washes, some of the things we were talking about would be covered under the Clean Water Act. That would be a real problem for Arizona, because we would lose a lot of really important washes to dredging and filling and development. There's also a state program, that there was a bill passed in 2021 that established a state water quality program. It is not very strong. It was basically written by the mining industry and the Central Arizona home builders. Was a public records request that revealed that they went in and took a bill that was not that strong and made it a lot weaker. And it too leaves out ephemeral waters from protections, and there's no dredge and fill requirements in it. It just relates specifically to water quality. So I'm not sure if that was the question you were asking, but the bottom line is the state of our ephemeral waters is tenuous with all of these things going on. And one thing that we talked about doing, especially that bill on dry washes is coming up in committee on Tuesday, is really working hard to inform people about how important they are, the services they provide, why we should care whether or not someone bulldozes a wash. So I hope that answered the question.
I think so. Okay, so let's conclude this. Thank you so much, Sandy. This is really informative. I'm moved to really follow that request to speak and to follow the state legislature. I hope you folks are too. On all the links to join Environment Day, I think you could get those from the Grand Canyon chapter web page. There's a calendar there in the main menu bar and events section in the main menu bar. And these events are all listed there. So you could just go there and click on a link and away you go. Please sign up. Please join us for Environment Day, and let's let these legislators know that we're out here. So with that, thank you all for attending. Let's go get some dinner. It's been a stimulating evening, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.